Okay, time for another edition of Lead Better. I'm Scott Baker. Sierra Holland joining me today because Mikey has disappeared. We don't know where he is, except it's somewhere in southern Utah where we have a secret gathering of leaders. And I was just talking with Randall about that in the last hour. So Sierra, maybe we'll dive into a few of our own personal reflections on what happens at Admired Leader Institute. So how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful and always jealous of the folks that get to be at ALI in Utah. It's truly like nothing you've ever experienced before.
It is. It's really magical out there. So I feel like for the first 2 days of this, sometimes we have field notes that are kind of like, they're really, ethical, moral conundrums. They grapple with certain things. Yesterday we talked about eliminating bureaucracy. And today we're talking about how to elevate issues and problems. These are like the nuts and bolts stuff. Like this one today actually just has a lot of like, you do this, you don't do this. You do this, you don't do this. So I think we'll have fun unpacking this. But this is actually kind of, again, we didn't design it this way. It's kind of in your wheelhouse because you're the one in strategic communication working with organizations. So I'm sure you've seen lots of leaders where they've got folks below them and they've got tiers of people above them. And it can get tricky for that person when they raise their hand and say, we've got a big problem down here. So what are the risks and what are the opportunities there?
Yeah, when I was reading this, I was thinking of so many different instances I've seen over the years. One of them, though, is leaders forget how much knowledge they carry, how much, their instincts are driving them because they've seen so many different situations over their career. So one of the easiest ways to read this field note is from the perspective of somebody who's a little bit earlier in their career or perhaps new to the organization. They might not know all of the different inner workings and what's really important to the leader, what's really important to the organization as a whole. So saying, make sure that you're raising up the right issues is a lot thornier than it might initially sound. So I was thinking about it as, what are the important conversations you need to have when you bring new team members on to help them understand, okay, here's how things really work. Here's what really matters when we're talking about our reputation, when we're talking about deadlines. Because some organizations might have some tolerance for you to go ahead and figure it out. Whereas I've seen some organizations where as soon as there is a delay in production timelines or in, technology implementation timelines, the leader wants to hear about it. Because I can think of, so many instances, one in particular where we were working with an organization, they're rolling out a brand new HR system to work on. And the person that's leading it has been really empowered and heard from their leader, I want you to run this. I want you to, problem solve on the fly. I want you to really take full ownership of it. But then when certain things started to become challenges, they didn't want to appear that they were too junior to figure it out themselves and actually held some things a little bit too close to the vest. So it's really a case for, do you know the boundaries enough of what your leader expects you to raise to them and what they want you to figure out? And it's worth the conversation.
Yeah, right. I'll kind of outline a couple of the first kind of 5 reasons that you might really need to raise or elevate a problem or an issue. But before I do that, there's an assertion at the beginning of the field note that I think is probably helpful to think about, which is part of this is just about problem solving. Like, what is the most effective way for me, for my leader, for others to actually deal with the issue on the table? But beyond that, it does actually reflect, because solving the problem reflects on the reputation of the organization. But how you do this reflects on you. And so for you and that organization to establish the trust of the leaders, a long-term credibility up and down, how you deal with these things on a routine basis says a lot about you and how others will view you. And so that takes a lot of maturity, doesn't it?
It does, and I had written down almost the same thing as I was reflecting on this field note, that the way you raise it to your leader says a lot about how you're viewing the scenario itself, and it can really demonstrate your maturity or, in some ways, your lack of maturity. I was thinking back to another field note we had on speaking in headlines. I think that quality is really important here because the last thing that your leader wants to hear when there is a big issue is a 3-minute preamble before you get to the problem that you need to solve. If you're saying, unfortunately, I just realized we forgot to send this major invoice last week. I need your quick approval on this so I can get it out the door and address it directly with the client. Can you speak clearly and succinctly enough right at the beginning of whatever it is that you're raising up so that you can then go into more details, but they know really how bad the situation is or isn't. Because they might hear it and go, that's actually quite routine. This is the way that we deal with that. Go forth and take it
Right.
over. And are you immediately presenting solutions, or is it something where you have enough wherewithal to know that they would really be the best person to ask? Sometimes you don't want to put
you
the
might
problem,
have an idea, but you realize for the
Right.
nature of the relationship, let them kind of give their perspective.
Yeah, and you have to know it. Am I putting a problem on my leader's desk? Am I taking it away? It's always going to be situational, but how you present yourself and how you're thinking through the problem can really demonstrate your credibility and your maturity and sort of being ready to think like that senior leader that you're going to, or not.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to that because you made the reference to this issue of taking a problem off my leader's desk, which gets into an area that I do want to explore, and I'm glad you brought it up. But let's look at these 5 reasons and kind of see if you have things to add to them or any disagreements with them. And I'm just going to kind of get them in my own sort of notes and not exactly how they're written in the field note. But you have an idea. We should escalate this, elevate it if the kind of the blast radius of the problem is big. It's going to affect deadlines and dollars and reputations. You would want to do it if the circle is also wide, that it's going to affect multiple teams, different divisions of the organization. It could also be one where you or your team, you're stuck, right? Other fixes have failed and you've put reasonable efforts into it. You may see things when inaction is actually dangerous, right? This could actually be a compliance problem. There could be risk to customers. And you might need to escalate it specifically if you know that your boss is already partially in the loop, right? You're obviously not going to want to surprise them with something, but you're also going to want to be like the boss is going to learn about this here very soon if I don't escalate it anyway. So let me do that now. So that's kind of the 5 sort of categories. Did you have other thoughts or things you wanted to add or subtract from those?
Yeah, I think you hit on all of the 5 points. One perhaps idea for people who are trying to think through, okay, how do I really instill understanding of those 5 points in my team that I've seen work really well is negative case studies. So people often want to talk about their wins. Of course, you can always raise up an example where somebody flagged an issue early enough that we were able to get ahead of it, or flagged something or raised it up and we dealt with it in the right ways. Of course, that's always going to be something people look for. But sometimes it's the negative, the cases where maybe somebody took too long to raise something up, or tried to handle it on their own, or took a very siloed or functional perspective to something that was going to touch a lot of different people in the organization. How do you use that story to instill the behavior that you want,
right?
To give the contrast of here's how they handled it, here's why they handled it that way. It was a very human reason why they didn't immediately jump into problem solving mode or didn't bring their leader in on the issue, because people see themselves in that and they have to put themselves in their own situation of it's easy to tell this story when everything has gone well, but how do you actually break down
Right.
ones where it's failed to help make any of those points, whether it's budgets or deadlines or making sure that you're putting relationships at the center. You don't want your leader to be surprised if their leader is involved in the decision making or has now been brought in to solve a customer problem. How do you really train people to put relationships at the center?
Well, it's a very good point that cautionary tales work for a reason, right? They do get our attention, and they can be very powerful and helpful. Let's go to the other side of the field note, which is if I know when to escalate an issue or a problem, what would be the signs that I wouldn't do it, right? So it could be if I can solve it, right? If it's a kind of a lower or more siloed issue, something that I can handle. There is a temptation. I like this point in there about an idea around if the issue here is small, you don't have to raise every problem. In fact, you as a leader often should just be going around looking fairly elegant, right? In fact, the biggest praise you could have for a leader is they handle so many problems and it looks like they're not even sweating. Like they just it's just like no big deal. And you're amazed at sort of the virtuosity of that. And then you want to also do it when we're going back to that very first issue, which is how do you want to be seen by the people in the organization? And if you're able to kind of demonstrate through your judgment things that actually help trust, well then great. Now, the thing you referred to back about taking, sort of problems off of a leader's desk, we kind of have a framework that I think maybe Mike and I have only referred to, once or twice over a couple of years of these conversations around sort of the nature of how we do updates, kind of the levels of updates. And I know this is content that you've covered a lot with clients. I think it would be helpful for us to hear it because I think probably a lot of people watching haven't heard us walk through that before.
Yeah, and are you specifically talking about like the ladder of confidence and how you frame things?
Yeah, right.
So often people are wondering how's the best way to frame this challenge or this opportunity, or you come out of a call and you think you know what you need to do. The first level is to turn to your leader and say, well, what should we do next?
What should we do next, right?
What
You're
should we do
asking for
next?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me what to do and
Level
I'll do
one,
it.
yeah.
That's level one. Level two is here's what I'm thinking we might want to do. What are you thinking we might want to do?
Right. Okay.
And it's a little bit further up on the ladder, but
Yep,
not very
right.
far. The third is here's what I'm planning to do. Stop me if I'm wrong. Stop me if you have
Yes.
any big challenges with it.
Right.
Stop me if you want to correct my direction. Here's what I'm planning to do. Stop me if I'm wrong. And then the fourth is here's what I did. So it's
right.
going forward and actually taking action. And that
Right.
can be a really helpful mental model for, okay, do I need to come at this problem at a level 0 of I've actually never seen this happen before. It seems new and novel to me. It seems like a big enough issue. It's clearing one of the 5 on the top 5 reasons to raise something up. Do I need to come at a level 0 of what should we do because I really don't know? Or could I use my own critical thinking skills and come at it at maybe a level 2 or a level 3? Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? Here's what I'm planning to do. Stop me if I should take a different approach.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a dynamite framework. And obviously each of those levels builds with your capacity, the depth of your relationship. I don't think you want to be day 2 on the job as a recent college graduate and be like, this is what I did. Right? That's gonna not go well for you.
Yeah, you might surprise people with your chutzpah,
Yeah,
but
right.
Perhaps you might misstep and not really understand the institutional context. So yeah, as you grow in your career or your understanding of the organization, you can progress to levels 3 and 4 of asserting your opinion on what to do sooner. But another way to think about that is how soon can we get earlier career talent to understand how to operate at those higher levels? So,
Right.
What are we doing early on to set up those mental models of how to make the right decisions, how to assess a situation and determine, does this need to be raised up or can I handle it on my own? There are a lot of different ways that leaders and HR programs and onboarding can actually set people up to understand what are the different power, pieces at play here, and how can I make the best decisions possible as soon as possible once I've joined an organization? And that goes for senior leaders too. Plenty of senior leaders come from one context, come to another, organizational context, and they're expected to make decisions pretty quickly. So, they're facing the same things that an early college grad is in certain circumstances because every organization has their own norms of what we always take action on as fast as possible and what we might problem solve on our own before bringing it to our leader.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've kind of witnessed this or watched it happen. I know I have, and I've done a lot less like on-site work with teams than you have, but I've done that in my past at Admired Leadership. But there's an observation in our content around the nature of how we frame these problems that we bring up or down. And one of the things is that there are a lot of really smart people, and they go and they get master's degrees and they're brought into organizations, and maybe they're in risk management, or maybe and they get paid large dollars or are given great responsibility for pointing out problems. And they get into a problem description mindset. And sometimes that leads to sort of a pessimistic sort of explanatory style. And yet when you see leaders rise to the top of an organization, they're dealing with the reality of the problem, but they're also able to frame the opportunities in ways that are very positive. That seems to be missing among a lot of junior people. And I've kind of said to teams, think of a great leader that you really admire. Give me a minute. Okay, how many would describe that person as very dour? Hardly anybody, right? And then I'm like, all of you guys are on the table. You're pretty dour. Like, when are you planning to change your personality, right? If you think you're going to get there. So is there an opportunity here for when we raise or escalate a problem that we're still kind of doing it in a way that's very clear-eyed about the problem, but also situating it in a way that reflects not only on how the organization can tackle it, but reflects well on you for the way that you raise it?
Sure. So, I mean, I'd have to find some great example of this, but you have to really think about, how can I frame this as an opportunity for us? So, it might be you think you're seeing a potential reputational issue with a client, and you're saying to yourself, like, I know I need to raise this in some way. And instead of throwing your colleague under the bus and saying, hey, Brenda over there is really bungling this client interaction. You would never want to do that, because, that's really going to throw somebody under the bus, and it won't make you look very good either. But you could say, hey, I'm noticing some patterns in how we're interacting with this client. I would love your help thinking through how we can actually turn this, this tension in our relationship and show how much we put our client's needs at the center. I'd love to brainstorm an approach for our next call with this client, so that we're actually showing our values more than we are today. And maybe it's taking a specific conflict in that relationship, or maybe it's taking an instance or a series of instances and saying, not this person or this team is making a mess of it, but saying, hey, I'm seeing something, I'm a little worried about it. I think this is an opportunity for us to reinforce what we're all about and be more direct about what we're all about, and really reinforce our values in a more explicit way. Here's how I'm thinking about it. Could you shape my thinking or be a good gut check for me?
Well, I think tomorrow we're going to have to get Brenda's view. And so
Maybe so.
All right. Sierra, thanks. Let's do this again tomorrow.
Thanks. See you then.
Thanks, everybody.